Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I'm your host, Lucas McCann. With us today, Cheretta Clerkley, Executive Director for the Association of Positive Behavior Support. Welcome.
Welcome. Hi.
Well, I do like to sort of hand off the mic here at the start. Cheretta, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are today, how you found the crazy world of associations.
Yeah, well, one, just thank you all for having the opportunity for me to come on and to share my story with everyone. I started out my career in government, local government at
Okay,
that.
you're in the
And
right spot for that.
yeah, in the right spot. And what ended up happening is I was in marketing and communications. I worked a lot with a lot of our partner organizations who just so happened to be nonprofits. And I started to discover I actually really like working with them a lot more than I liked all of kind of the regulations of government. And so I transitioned into at first working for a local school in the Washington, D.C. area that was focused on special education. And I managed the communications and the magazine that they had there. And after that, I was hooked. I wanted to figure out more ways for me to get involved with associations. And so from there, I just kind of made my way through different associations, some small, some large. And I think, what I would kind of say was my big kind of break in associations is I worked for Children's National Medical Center, which is now Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I helped to do the communications for all of the metropolitan area and got an opportunity to work with parents as well as the doctors to share some of the groundbreaking surgeries that they were doing. And so from that opportunity, it kind of connected me with my love for medical education and all of those things within that space. And I decided I wanted to, I thought, become a chief communications officer. And then once I kind of felt like I learned all that I could from a communication standpoint, I decided I really want to put my sights on a chief executive or operations role.
Excellent. Well, the communications and marketing background and just having met you a short time, Cheretta, I think you are a chief marketing operator, communications officer. But we're gonna come back to that. This is your first executive director role, correct?
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about how it's going. Maybe some things you've learned in this new seat.
Yeah, so I joined the Association for Positive Behavior Support in January, coming into an organization that's mostly volunteer led, had the same executive director since the beginning. And so they were really looking at how can we bring in an executive director to kind of help them catapult to the next iteration of what the association will be. And, of course, when you're talking about change during the interview process, it's really different than when you're actually in place within the organization and starting to implement those changes. And so that storytelling aspect is really critical. We just recently went through the process of approving a plan to help to move us forward in a new direction, which has been, I think, for me, one of the most rewarding experiences, navigating new personalities, helping to shape a vision so that people can buy into that, but then also dealing with, there's some mourning that happens when change occurs because you
Absolutely.
realize that maybe we have to adapt to the way that we have been doing things. And so leading through that process, I rely a lot on my communication skills and helping people to kind of understand what happens if we want to continue to stay the same, and then what's going to happen if we actually take a risk and start doing something differently. And so that has been really exciting to get a lot of support to start to try to shake some things up and be a disruptor.
Yeah. And so, you shared it. There's a growth path, right? A journey that we all take throughout our career, and you've sort of reached this executive director role and have had some recent big wins. But before we get to the big wins, let's go back and share maybe a little bit more of that experience coming up through associations as a leader and various roles, and sort of some of the challenges, obstacles that you faced.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the greatest challenges that I faced was, I decided early on that I knew that I was very interested in medical education and shaping that for professionals in different medical occupations. And so coming into that environment, you didn't see a lot of women that looked like me. You didn't see a lot of diversity. I think all of that is starting to change in some regard, but from a leadership perspective, it was really hard to figure out, okay, if I'm starting out here in a senior manager role, what's the
Hmm.
pathway for me to get to that leadership position? And I think the best experience that I have is I was fortunate to have one of the best mentors that I could have asked for, which was my boss at the American Diabetes Association. Odette Brown she just kind of took me under her wing, even without me really realizing it, because I was younger and I thought, okay, we're equals in this conversation. And she did a lot of helping me to kind of see, here are some of the things that I did that I don't want you to do. The mistakes that or assumptions that I made when I was entering into, boardroom meetings or senior level meetings. And she did that in a way where I could receive that information and it helped to make me stronger and more prepared. And she really helped to give me an opportunity to showcase my skills, demonstrate the value that I brought to an organization by carrying my name in meetings and in different spaces where I wasn't present, but you had someone advocating for you. And I always think about that from a leadership perspective. When I manage teams, how can I help to elevate others, particularly women, minorities who maybe not always are having those opportunities to be heard in that way?
Well, you also shared you had a great mentor in your even younger years, and a good story maybe you could share about when you were just 10 years old. This leadership training started early for you.
It did. It started really early. I have to say, I was blessed with the best parents, and my dad really wanted me to know that regardless of what pathway I took from a career perspective, that it was important to acknowledge the fact that you have a voice. And one of my favorite stories or memories with him is I begged him after school one day, oh, I want, to go to the store and I want to go in by myself and I don't want you to do it because I'm going to do it. I'm such a big girl. I was around 10 or 11 years old. And so he was like, sure, I'll wait in the car and you go in. But when I walked in, it was after school time. So it was like all the older kids, all the older girls, and they weren't really making space for me to like, go so I could give my order. And I got scared and I didn't want to take that opportunity to like say, hi, I'm here and I want some space to do what I want to do. So I turned around and went back in the car and my dad looked at me and said, you didn't get anything? And I said, no, I didn't. And he said, well, you know what? You're going to go back in there and don't come back out until you get what you came here for. And it was a really good lesson for me to kind of understand that I have to use my voice. I can't always depend on someone else to advocate for me. And so throughout my career, when there were challenging times, I also didn't think back to that memory around how it is that I want to be able to communicate what I need. And sometimes that can be really difficult, but I think it's really critical to the success that I've been able to have within the association space.
I love that story for two reasons. One, I have an 11-year-old daughter, right, who
Oh.
was is that age that you were at the time, and it really has me thinking about the same things. I'm 6'3". I wasn't the tallest person in my family, so by nature she's very tall, right? And so it's interesting in her age, she is not very intimidated. She's got lots of great
Mhm.
confidence when she gets around people who are taller than her and she sees that as older and more mature, she shrinks and it's hard for me
Mhm.
to watch. And so I need to continue to push her in the same way to think, no, you are who you are, and to find your voice regardless of what situation you find yourself in, because there's always going to be people who are more fill in the blank than you.
Mhm.
That's just the world, right? Um, and then secondly, we recently did a strategic planning meeting with the team, and I was asking people, what would you do differently, personally and professionally? And I found there was a trend in the circle, specifically amongst the women, who were sharing this in a very vulnerable sense to say, I lost a few years at some point in certain
Mhm.
cases within my career because I didn't do this, I didn't push that. And what they were really saying is what you just said, which is finding their voice. And some are in various stages of finding their voice, but you're right, that's exactly what the words they were looking for. And when you do that and you understand who you are, there's a lot of power right
Oh
behind
my
that, but
goodness.
it leads to confidence. And so tell us a little bit about what that meant for you and how that changed your just perspective on things.
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like not until I really decided for myself that I was going to use my voice. And sometimes it wasn't always for myself. If I was seeing something that I didn't feel was right, or if I felt like, there was an opportunity for me to elevate someone else, that I needed to do it, particularly if no one else was doing it. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a risk to that too, right? Not everyone's gonna to love hearing, dissenting opinions or a new idea. But I think that goes back to communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can you help people to understand why you are making recommendations to shift or try something differently? And for me, I really feel like the communication background has really helped me as I've moved up the ladder from a standpoint of from communications to operations to now as an executive director leader, helping people to understand how you fit into the story, why you are a critical piece of the story and the plan that we have is really important. So I leverage those skill sets to help me to be successful. And sometimes try to figure out really creative ways to tell that story, either in a visual way or leveraging stories from the community that we serve so that we can help people to understand the value that they're bringing.
Yeah, you just like teed up naturally a great transition for us to talk about sort of the bigger win that we talked about recently. And as you're in your role as executive director, tell us a little bit about this big win, and then talk a little bit about how it came to be.
Yeah. So we recently just went through a process of kind of evaluating the entire business structure of our organization, figuring out what are we doing really well? What are some of the things that we need to sunset? And what are some of the opportunities that we need to start to go after in order to feel like we're fulfilling the internal and external stakeholders that we
Mm-hmm.
have from an organization perspective. And so with that comes a lot of change management. There's a lot
Yeah.
of opinions, there's a lot of ideas around how to be able to do that. And so it was really important for me to take the financial, the operational, the programmatic functions and figure out how can I tell a story for the new direction, the new pathway that I think it is that we should create as an organization to help us to be more successful. And so I had the opportunity to start that process in March, and now we're on the other end of that. In April, we'll be starting to release what that new plan will be, what that new direction will be. And so I'm really excited to have the support of the board and the executive committee to help to start to chart that pathway. And it was a challenging process. It wasn't easy. And there were a lot of things looking back that I would say, maybe I should have thought about this differently in order to get buy-in quicker. But I'm really happy with where we ended up. I feel like there's a lot of excitement around the new kind of path that we'll be taking, but there's also a lot of opportunities for us to grow as a community, to give back to the professionals who serve in the positive behavior support space.
Yeah. What I really liked about this specifically is it really highlighted your ability to tell a story. And as I was getting ready for the show, I told you I was looking back at some of your background, and I noticed marketing and journalism. I mean, which is storytelling. I had my own regrets. It's like maybe I should have been a journalist to like better myself. These are things that I'm personally working on. Just communication, and we all have to communicate. There's no role where you don't have to communicate something, even if you're behind the scenes and you're working with data or you're working with the website. All of these things are telling the story of what you're trying to accomplish. So is that something you think about? I mean, is it just, well, how does that weave into sort of how you go about your role?
Yeah, I think for me, I have just a general love and passion for communication coming from the perspective of that's what I started my career out on. And I
Hmm.
often felt that there were a lot of times, particularly in nonprofit environments, because that's where I've spent most of my career,
Yeah.
where the communications and marketing piece was the afterthought. You were only brought into the room when the whole strategy was already designed. You weren't really there to provide input. And then when you get there, you're saying, well, did you guys think about who it is that we're trying to target and where they are and how they're going to come? And then it was like you had all these people looking at you with like wide eyes, like, oh, no, we didn't. But you'll figure that out after the fact. And so I realized early on that because communication wasn't at the center of some of those discussions, that as I progressed throughout my career, I wanted to make sure that I leverage those skill sets to be able to say, if we're going to be good communicators, we have to start that internally as an organization, but also leverage that to communicate externally. And so I'm always thinking about those pieces of how can we take information that's really complex, break it down in simpler ways so that we can reach a wider audience. I think it's really important, and I think it's often something that is overlooked. If we look at associations who are really successful, they understand the value of communication and how to do
Yeah.
that well.
Well, and most people think of marketing and communications as external, right? You're thinking, well, you're looking to your members and your constituents. And what I'm realizing is the bigger factor into the larger terms, longer term success is being just as effective internally, right? So there's change management with things within the industry, but there's change management within the organization and being able to communicate that. And I won't call anybody out outside of this call on this, but I've watched it in the industry happen so often where, there's change.
Mm-hmm.
Association staff changes, board changes, sometimes by policy measure, we need to move people in and out and create room for things to improve. And when that isn't effectively communicated internally, it just feels like all of that yuck just goes out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that point is really important and one that, like you're saying, is often overlooked. It's really critical to have the brand ambassadors start and champion things at the very beginning before it's even external. And if you can't build that infrastructure internally, it's really hard to build trust and credibility externally. And so I really try to think about, what is our elevator pitch that everybody on the board needs to be aware of? Because we all have to be singing the same song. If not, it's going to not sound good to anybody. And so I want to make sure that we're providing information and sequencing it out in a way that really makes a lot of sense to build the greatest buy-in.
Yeah. It's a little bit, you have to work on yourself before you can work on others. Like, I don't necessarily like this reference, but you put the oxygen mask on in the airplane before you help others. Like you internally, you have to have your stuff together,
Mm-hmm.
and be in sync and communicate well so that you can then all communicate in your own way. Again, whether it's through, business development, whether it's through marketing, whether it's through advocacy, everybody has to understand and communicate internally. It all starts there.
Yeah. And then I think, one other thing that I would say to that, not everybody's going to agree. So even when you don't have the full consensus, there has to be that point in time where, as an internal part of the strategy, you say, okay, we're going to have to agree to disagree, but this is the path forward because the majority, said that this is the way that we want to go. And so sometimes that can be really difficult and challenging. But I think ultimately when the results and the outcomes start to come in, that's when you start to see a shift, or at least that's what I've experienced.
Yeah, and not being willing and open to breaking those eggs, those metaphorical eggs, if you were. I think that holds people back.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to finding your voice is you have to be open to that. I think part of finding your voice is maybe capturing some confidence around, well, this is what I believe, and this is what we're going to do, and yeah, you're going to ruffle some people's feathers.
Yeah. And I think that for me, I know in my career, I really would consider myself a disruptor. I really try to come in and figure out what are the ways that we can do this and take calculated risks that I feel like would come back with a bigger return on our investment. And so helping to sometimes tell that story and convince, leadership and other internal stakeholders that that's the right move can also be very challenging because they can't see the full picture. But in my mind, I'm like, I can see how all these different things will connect together, and why, if we don't take these opportunities, we'll be missing out. And I try to leverage it from the standpoint of ensuring that I'm listening to the people that are a part of the team, that I'm providing clues to kind of hear something that's really important to them, and how can I fit that into the story that I'm telling so that they can see how they can, build with us.
Yeah. Disruptor, innovator, communicator, leader. Again, we've only known each other a short time. These are words that I would use to describe you. I think it's wonderful, and
I need to
it
put
makes
you on
you
my shoulder.
oh, well. It makes you a perfect mentor for people in this industry who are coming up. And we talked about the person who referred you to our show. I think was a mentor of yours, and Allie Brown's wonderful human. I really really enjoyed talking to her, and she's coming along as an up and coming leader herself, and you must take some pride and joy in having played a role in her career and her life. But it, tell us a little bit about, you have a passion for this mentorship. How do you approach this? What do you share with individuals? Um, and yeah, just tell us a little bit more about your approach. How you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about mentors that I've had over my career who have given me an opportunity to be successful and to be in rooms that I never even imagined that I would be invited into. And when someone does that for you, I feel like it's only naturally to do it for other people. And Allie is a great example. She and I worked together, and I remember the very intimate and vulnerable conversations we had around where she wanted to ultimately end up in her career. And so I worked with her, and we did this exercise where it was like, let's map it out. Let's put it to paper. Let's write a plan. Let's make it plain, and let's figure out how can I leverage opportunities within the association we were at the time to help you to get that visibility and that connection to other people within my network that could help to support you. And I think she's a really shining example of taking that and paying it forward. I mean, she's doing so much great work to help to support other women. And that's something that's really important for me because there's enough space for us all, and we're all bringing different and unique talents. And so if I know that there's a skill set that I don't have, that I wouldn't be the best fit for, I'm sure there's someone in my network where I could throw that opportunity to them and I could make that introduction. And so it's those small things along the way that I think are really important. And I also don't really like this kind of myth that you get into these positions and you want to kind of close the door behind you. I'm of the mindset of how can we open the door, and I can bring 10 other people with me, and then they can bring 10 other people. I think it's going to not only benefit those that are connected to each other, but ultimately the organizations. It's about building that community.
Yeah, I like that. You bring enough people into the room, it's going to get crowded, and somebody's going to have to, move on to the next room and progress, if you will. And as you're talking, I'd never really put this connection together, but I'm a big advocate of strategic planning for organizations that, you need to be thinking about the future, how you're going to grow, how you're going to progress as an organization, getting everybody sort of in sync. Um, and bringing in a board when it's necessary, but also including folks on the team. But what I heard you sort of describe was sort of a personal strategic planning, if you will, with Allie in that instance. I've never really put those two together to say, yeah, why would we do all this planning for the organization but not think to do it for ourselves?
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we get so busy, we get so wrapped up. I mean, the work that associations do are so mission oriented that sometimes we put all of that energy into the mission, and then we look back and say, "Oh, I wish I would have went for that opportunity," or "I wish I would have thought about this thing." And the whole goal is that we should be growing and changing and evolving so that we can become the best versions of ourselves. And to be honest, that may not always be in one association. That may be another association that's larger and has more opportunities. And I think it's really about finding what's the right fit for you as an individual that's going to help to provide that career fulfillment, but then also mix with that mission driven approach that we all crave in the association space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can I throw a couple of fun ones at you, Sharetta?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, I like the question. What's something you're looking forward to in every year? Like when you start a new fresh year, what's something you look forward to?
I look forward to vacation. I feel like that's the first thing we do. Come the new year, my husband and I are trying to plot out all the calendars between the three kids, his busy schedule, my busy schedule, to kind of figure out what it is that we're going to do as a family. That family time is really important, where we can kind of shut off all of the electronic devices and just spend some quality time together. Because I turn and I look and I have a 13-year-old, and it's like, we only have so many vacations left together. And so I really want to make it memorable.
I think about that too. Same. I have a 14-year-old, and it's coming sooner than I believe. He's coming to high
Yes.
school, and yeah. I also believe there's mistakes that I've made, and you could say, oh, I'd love to just take that magic eraser and say I never made that. But there are mistakes that I am actually glad that I made, because I learned from that. Sometimes you can read stuff in a book and you can sort of navigate it around. Sometimes you can't. Just have to be a life lesson. So what's a mistake, if we want to call it that, an opportunity that happened in your career that you're glad happened in a way?
I think for me, it goes back to what we talked about earlier around finding your voice and using your voice around, issues that you're really passionate about. And I think for me, my perspective on a lot of things may be different, because I am not only a mom, a woman, but I'm a Black woman. And so a lot of the things that, from a social justice aspect, might be more important to me, and I might have stronger feelings toward it because it's impacting a community that I care a lot about. And so I find myself sometimes leveraging and really challenging organizations to think about that inclusive culture. If we're putting statements out saying that everybody is invited, but then when things happen, outside in the real world, and we don't want to
Yeah.
comment or put our voices behind it, I take issue with that, because I'm a part of that community. I just don't come into work and then just leave. And so I think it's really important that we take a look at that, and that when we see things that don't necessarily align with that, it has to be enough people to raise their voice to say something. And in some cases, not everybody's going to be fond of that, but it goes back to, it's something that's personally and professionally important to me, and I'm willing to take that risk.
Yeah. You took it to a whole new level. I love that. What's something, Sharetta, that we couldn't find out about you, online or on your resume?
Well, you might be able to find it out about me online, but I am the world's biggest Beyonce fan. I've
Okay.
seen her multiple times. I just love what she stands for. I love the creativity, the innovation that she brings to her industry. And so I find a lot of inspiration behind that, and try to think of ways of how I can reinvent myself in the space that I'm in from an association standpoint. So most people who know me really well know what a big fan, and you might find me quoting Beyonce references throughout the day, to just keep that 9 to 5 day a little bit more exciting.
Do you like the country stuff?
I do. And
It's
I
fun.
didn't think that I would. I will say my favorite song so far is Spaghetti, because it has a little bit of the rap in it. And I
Yeah,
really enjoy when she raps.
that's great. Well, Sharetta, thank you so much for your time and the conversation. I'd be happy to do it again sometime, and I hope we run into each other. I know you're not coming to annual this year, but we'll find a time to make it happen. Enjoy the board meeting. And as we wrap up, as I often do, always do, is there somebody from your network that you think our audience would benefit from hearing from?
Oh, definitely. I will say Jean Axios, who is the new CEO and president of creating healthier communities. I think he would be an amazing person to speak with.
Wonderful. We'll reach out and hopefully he will join us on the show, and love to have that conversation as well. And thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Lucas.